So welcome everyone to Simply Reports, useful reports to run at your library. My name is Sarah Dixon. I'm a client services librarian here at Yellowhead Regional Library. Apologies for my voice. I'm getting over a cold right now. So today we'll be looking at Simply Reports. Simply Reports makes it easy to create reports in your Polaris ILS. You can create, manage, and produce nearly 150,000 different types of reports. So last week we learned the layout of Simply Reports, and if you missed last week's webinar, it is available on our website now under Toolkit, Recorded Webinars, and all 3 weeks of the webinars will be on the Recorded Webinars page shortly. But if you missed last week's, that one is there right now. Also, in this webinar, we will be going through each type of report and build useful reports that you can run in your library. So all of the reports we will be building today are available on our Simply Reports depository document. If you have any questions or any reports that you would like me to build, you can type them in the chat window at any time, and I will build those reports either afterwards. I can walk you through it by email or by phone, or if there's time in the webinar, we can do it during the webinar. Also, this webinar will be recorded and available on our website for future use. If you would like to register for next week's webinar, which is on using Simply Reports in Excel with pivot tables, you can sign up for them up here on upcoming training webinars. And lastly, there will be an evaluation at the end if you could please fill it out. So let's get started. So I'm just on the YRL website, and to access Simply Reports, you can just go to Toolkit, Polaris Resources and Training, choose Simply Reports, and then the login is right here. And again, if you're going to be using Simply Reports often, I recommend saving it as one of your favorites. And I had mentioned before that all of the reports we're talking about today are in the depository, so the link to the depository is right here, and I'll just show you the depository. This is it. And it's just broken down by which type of report it is. So if you wanted to be taking any notes, the only notes I recommend taking is the name of the type of report that I'm building, and then you can just go to this document, and then it'll have full instructions on how to build that report. But let's actually go to the login. So again, it's your Polaris login. And we're going to start with patron list reports. So we're under the patron tab, patron list reports. And the first report we're going to run is email list of all expired patrons. So this can come in handy if you want to let patrons know that their card has just recently expired, or if you want to be cleaning anything up in Polaris. So it can be very handy. So first we're going to move over the patron barcode, then their full name. And again, this is just all in alphabetical order. And then we want the patron email address. And patron expiration date. And then we want to organize it by full name, and then we can add expiration date, or we could just leave it on full name. It doesn't really matter if you add expiration date or not. And then under patron general filters, we're going to choose a branch. And then under patron relative date filters, we're going to choose expiration date more than, and just 1 day. So anyone who's expired is basically going to come up. And then under patron miscellaneous filters, we only want to see patrons in this report that have an email address entered. So we don't care about the other patrons that have expired for this particular report. So we're going to check mark email address and make sure that the radio button for present is checked off. And then we're going to hit submit. And so then we have the report, so we could either download the report into Excel. If we want to save this report and run it every couple months, we can do that as well. If you want to be saving it, you might even want to do a date range for expiration date, so you're only seeing the last month if you're constantly, like if you have permissions to send emails to your patrons, depending on local library policy. You could also create a patron record set if you wanted to make changes to their accounts in Polaris as well. Okay, the next report we're going to build is under Count Reports in Patron tab. So let's say we want to know the number of new members to your library in a given time period. So some reports that you're going to build actually have very few columns. It's more the filters that is getting you the information you're looking for. So in this case, in this particular report, we're just going to move over patron branch name, and then under patron filters, we're going to choose our branch. And then we're going to choose a registration date under patron date filters. And we're going to choose a range. So you can run this report. You can look back at last year, for example, and run it for each month and see how many patrons were registered each month. But we'll just take a look at January 1st until the 31st. And then we'll hit submit. It's just going to give us a number. So this particular library registered 176 new patrons in January. So handy report gives you useful information, and you can kind of compare months and years. So it can be a very useful report to run. You could also do a similar report like this in the patron statistical reports if you want to look at, like if you're wanting to compare many months over a couple of years, you would probably want to run a statistical report to get this information, and that way it breaks it down for you so you're not having to run 12 reports. But if you're just wanting to look at one specific time period or just a couple, you can do it under patron count reports. But let's move on to patron statistical reports. So this is similar to the previous one. It's a number of registrations created, but we're going to break it down by staff members. So some of the bigger libraries have quite a few staff members, so you might want to see how many patrons each staff member that's on the circ desk is registering in a given time period. So to do that, we're choosing patron statistical reports, and we're choosing patron registration created. And we're going to leave it on activity summary for the subcategories and a general summary for report type. And then the detail level is not applicable for this report type. But then we do want to make sure we're choosing include transacting user detail for this particular report. If you don't want it broken down by staff member, then you could just leave it on run report by transacting organization only. But then you probably want to be changing it by patron branch and then look at it month to month instead. So that's the slight difference between the two. But let's look at library. And then you're going to choose a date range. So let's just look at the last 2 months. And then again, normally with statistical reports, especially if it's during peak hours, you want to save and schedule the report. But in this case, we're just going to do run report now and submit. And so it's just showing the different users and how many registrations were created. Okay, the last report we're going to look under patrons is patron history reports. And I ran this ahead of time. It's a very slow report. It can take up to 10 minutes, but all you're going to do is type in the patron barcode in this field and choose a start date and an end date. And it's a 95-day window. So it's any 95 days. And if you make a mistake and it's bigger than 95 days, a pop-up will come up saying that you need to make it 95 days. So it does let you know right away that it's not going to work and you have to change the date ranges. So if you need to look at a long window, you might have to run this report a few times and just keep changing the date range. And so I'll just show you what the report looks like, and it can open in Word or Excel, and I have it just in Excel. So you're going to see the patron information, the basic information that's on the patron account at the top, but then you're going to get a lot more detailed information at the bottom. So you're going to see all of the transaction history. And you'll even see which staff checked items out, all the details about the item, lets you know the time, the workstation, the transaction type. So it gives you a lot more information than what you could gather in just the patron account in Polaris. So it can be a very, very handy report for you to run. Any questions before we move on to patron account reports? Okay, so we'll choose patron account, and we're going to work on account reports. And we're going to look at outstanding charges for patrons over a certain amount. So let's say we want to see the biggest charges some of your patrons have. So maybe you only want to see charges over $50. You can run account report, and you'll see that list. So I like putting over a certain amount because it does organize it for you from lowest number to highest number, and so that way it's not a really you're not seeing the other items. Although if you moved it into Excel, you can easily sort it differently, so it's not a big deal. But if you just want to look at it just in the Explorer window, it is nice to put a certain amount in. So we're going to add patron full name. Patron barcode, and then we're going to put in sub balance, outstanding balance only. And these sub columns are really nice, and they appear in a lot of the count reports throughout SimplyReports. And then we're going to organize by sub balance. And we want to make sure that the options below may be used with sub balance, which we're using. So we're going to check mark or leave it on outstanding charges. And then now we just have to add some filters. So I'm actually choosing patron filters here instead of patron account general filters, and I'm going to choose the patron badge. And then patron account miscellaneous filters. This is where we put the charges about. So maybe we only want to see charges over, let's say, $75. And then we would hit submit. And so it gives you the patron's full name, their barcode, the balance, number of transactions, and the number of patrons because it's a count report, but it will just be one. And you can just see the full list as it gets higher. Okay, so let's move on to patron account statistical reports. So this report's going to show you charges per month broken down by fee reason. So this again is a very handy report, gives you ideas about like what type of charges your library is getting from patrons, like damaged items or replacement costs or late dues. So it can be very useful. So we're going to leave it on patron accounting charge, and we're going to choose reason code. But again, you can see that there are other options as well, but in this case, we want to see the reason. General summary monthly, and we're going to leave the detail level on month. And we're going to leave the run report by transacting organization only, and then we're going to choose a branch. And then we'll choose a date. So you get relative date or date range, depending on what you want to do with it. We'll just look at the last 30 days, and we're going to hit run report now in this case, just so you can see what it looks like. And then we'll submit. And so you can see, in this case, there's card replacement, damaged materials, overdue items, which is the biggest amount, and replacement cost, which is the second biggest amount. And it breaks it down by month, the number of transactions that fit under that criteria, and the total amount. So again, very useful report. Any questions before we move on to holds? Okay, so the first report we're going to run is unclaimed holds by item assigned branch. And you might be thinking that this report exists in the reports and notices tab in Polaris, but we recently realized that it's only if you're placing an item level hold. So, and most people don't. Most people place bib level hold, so it's actually not gathering the information we want. So I would definitely recommend running this report every few months just to see if there's unclaimed holds, like your items at other libraries that have been unclaimed for quite some time. And so most of the time it's going to be pretty short list or not have anything. So you don't have to run it monthly, but it's probably good to run this quarterly or twice a year. So we're going to choose hold pickup branch name. So that way we know which library to contact. Mark title, and there's browse title, there's sort title, and there's also just mark title under some of the tabs. They're all pretty similar. You probably won't notice much of a difference. It doesn't really matter which one you choose. And then patron barcode, so we can let the library know which patron it is, patron full name, the hold status, and hold till date, so you can know how long it's been unclaimed for. And then we're going to choose hold general filters. And we want to choose the hold status of unclaimed. So another thing you could do, instead of scrolling just on the sides, to get to what you're looking for, you can just kind of click inside and then just choose the letter. So I'm typing in a U, and it brings me down to U for unclaimed. And if there was a few U's, I could just keep typing in U until I get to the one I'm looking for. So like for libraries, for example, if I wanted to get to Alberta Beach, I would just keep typing A 4 times and it would bring me down to Alberta Beach. So just something to keep in mind to make it easier to go through the different areas faster. And then we're going to go into item filters. And we're choosing the assigned branch, and this is where you're going to choose your branch. And then we're going to run the report. So again, it's a pretty short list, and what's really important is the hold till date. All of these are pretty recent, January, February, so you don't need to worry. But if you saw something from 2015 or older, you might want to contact the library. Obviously, if it's over a year, it's probably gone, but it might just be something that you want to remove from your list, so maybe you'd check it in so that it's off of this list, or just contact the library just to confirm that it's not there. Okay, so now we're going to go to count reports. And hold count reports can be really handy for deciding what to purchase in your library. So the first report we're going to run is hold system-wide. So this is just basically what's the most popular items in track. So it's a pretty easy report to run. All we want is the mark browse author and the mark browse title. And we're just going to choose the select top number. So I only want to see the 50 most popular requests. So what has the most holds right now in Polaris? And so we can see the number of requests. If there is no author, most of the time that means it's a DVD, so something to keep in mind. And if there is an author, then it's usually a book. So this might be something you want to look at to help decide what to purchase. So what we could do to be more specific is actually run a hold report by your patrons where you don't have a copy. So what are your patrons placing holds on where you don't have a copy? So we're going to unselect select top number. We're going to leave mark browse author and mark browse title, but we're going to change the number of requests greater than. And we're going to say, you could either say 1 or 2 depending on the size of your library. Bigger library, you could even do 5. It depends how long of a list, but it usually isn't too long of a list. And number of holdable items is less than 1. And then we're going to choose a library. And then we just need to choose one other thing. Under Hold General Filters, the pickup branch, and we're going to choose the same library. And then we'd hit submit. So a couple things to note with this report. Sometimes the items on the list, you might see a lot of holds or a lot of requests, and it might be because it's a book club item. Also, sometimes you'll see items on this list and you'll think that you do have a copy of it, and so you're not sure why it's coming up here. It might be that you have a copy of the hardcover book and all of your patrons happen to place holds on the paperback. So in that case, you might want to contact the patrons or move the holds if there's a better chance of them getting this faster. So if you think you have it, it's always good to double check, but this might be a good starting point for what to purchase for your library. Okay, so next we'll move on to item reports. Any questions before we start item reports? Okay, so the first report we're going to build is a weeding report based on collection. So you can build a weeding report in Polaris under the Reports and Notices custom area, but if you want to be more specific and be able to play around with numbers a bit more, it's definitely nice to build it in SimplyReports because then you can play around more and get closer to a refined search of the amount of items you want to be getting rid of. So first I'll choose the basic columns that you want. So we would want the item barcode, item call number, and we're going to choose mark author, mark title, and mark pub year, because it's nice to know how old the title is. Might help you deciding whether or not you want to keep something. Item last checkout or renewal date. So this is important to know when the last time it circulated. So often this is the main one that we're using for criteria for whether or not we're keeping an item in our collection. And then item lifetime cert count is also nice to know. See if it was really popular at one time. Maybe it's just really ratty on your shelf, so it was really popular and it could still be popular, but you just need a new copy. So nice to take a look at that too. And then item creation date. And the reason why I like creation date is this way if you have donations and it's an older title, so it has an older pub year, but you've just added it in the last year and it hasn't circulated, it hasn't really had a chance to possibly circulate, so you might want to leave it a bit longer. So I like looking at the creation date so you know how recently you added the item. And then we're going to organize by call number, author, and then title, and that way it's showing up the way it would be on our shelves. So here's where we're going to add filters. So under item general filters, assigned branch, we are going to choose a library. And then we are going to choose a collection. And then one really important thing to note whenever running item reports, you pretty much always want to choose record status final. Unless you want to look specifically at deleted items, most of the time you don't want to see deleted items because you'll be looking on your shelves for items that you can't find. So it's always good to choose record status final so you're only seeing items that are not deleted yet. And then now we're going to add filters specifically for weeding. So we're going to choose item relative date filters prior to a specified date. And the most important one is last checkout or renewal date more than. So depending on the size of your library, how often you weed, you can play around. Some libraries want to weed items that haven't been checked out in a year, and other libraries want to weed items that haven't been checked out in 7 years. So it kind of depends how many items you want to get rid of. So in this case, let's say we want to look at 2 years. So we could just run this report now, and it would be fine, and it would give us a lot of information, and it would be very useful. But there's more things that we can add to refine the report so that it's not so large or it's getting more data that we're actually looking for. So other things we could add are creation date more than. So that way you're not seeing the donated items that just came into your collection in the last year. So let's say that the creation date had to be more than 2 years old. We could run the report now. And in this case, it didn't change it, but often it will bring it down quite a bit. And then two other filters that we could add are item circulation filters. So we can choose lifetime circulation and say that we only want to see items that have had less than 10 circulations. So that way it isn't as popular of an item. So really popular items we're not going to see on the list. And then we could hit submit. And it changes it by quite a lot. And another filter we can add is under bibliographic record filters. And we can choose mark publication year. So this is especially handy with doing nonfiction. You might know that you don't want to weed anything that's from 2009 or newer because it's too new. You've added it just like it's a brand new title or new enough for your collection, so you don't even want to see it. So what you could do is just type in a date range. So I'm just typing in year 0 to 2008. In this particular case. So we're only going to see items that have that publication year range. So anything newer than 2008 will not show up. And then now we have a list. So we had started with about 1,000 results and now we're down to 203 results. So it's just a bit more refined with the extra filters. So it can be very useful when you're building a weeding report. Any questions about this particular report, since this is the most popular report run in SimplyReports? Okay, so let's move on to item count reports. So now we're going to look at the number of items added this year broken down by collection. So we're just going to look at the item assigned collection name. And we're going to organize it by item assigned collection name. And this might seem silly since there's only one column, but when you're in a count report, if you don't organize it by the column in the center, it will organize it by number. So if you want it in alphabetical order, you would want to make sure you move the column over for sort. If you want it by numerical order, then you don't move this over and it'll show you the most popular or the items or the collections that have the most items added in that particular date range. So then we'll add a side branch. And record status of final. So we're not seeing deleted items. Then item relative date filters between two dates in this case. And we're going to say creation date between, and in this case we can look back at 1 year. And because I'm doing a relative date filter, it's the last year from or a year back from today. You could do a specific date range if you wanted to look at 2015, for example. And so then it's in alphabetical order, the collection name, and the number of items you added in each particular collection. Okay, so we'll move on to statistical reports. And we just have 2 more reports to run, and then the webinar is over. So under item statistical reports, we're going to run a report about yearly circulation by collection in your library. So we're going to go to checkout, and we're going to choose item assigned branch or item assigned collection code, and we're going to look at yearly. So what is really popular in your library? And then I'm going to choose a specific date range in this case because we want to look at 2015. And so you can choose from the drop downs to get to the month you're looking for, or you could go back and forth on the side depending on which way you prefer or how far back you need to go. And then we'll make sure we choose Run Report Now. And we'll hit Submit. So here it's showing you the transaction branch name and the item collection name, and then it's showing the year and the total. So you may see collection codes that your library doesn't use. It's because there were holds that were brought in for your patrons, and your patrons had checked those items out. So sometimes you'll see, for example, audio cassette, there's only one checkout, so it probably came in from another library. So if you're wondering why there's additional collection names you don't use, it's from other libraries. But it definitely gives you an idea of what's really popular in the past year at your library. Okay, so the last statistical report we're going to run is number of item records created broken down by staff member. So you might just want to know how many item records each staff member is making, especially if you're a bigger library or there's a lot of staff members adding item records. Can be useful. And so we're just going to leave it as activity summary, general summary, but we want to make sure we check mark transacting user details so we know which user created that record. And then we're just going to look at a date range. So I'm just going to look at the last 30 days. And again, check mark Run Report Now, hit OK, and Submit. So it's going to break it down by the user and how many item records were created. So again, all of these reports are on our SimplyReports depository, so you just need to remember which area it was in, such as like patron or patron account or holds or items, and the name or the type of report, and then you can just click on it and it will show you the exact instructions on how to build that particular report. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me afterwards, or you can send them in the chat window right now. And if you could please fill out the evaluation when you've closed out of the webinar. So thank you very much and have a great day.